It is February in the year 2026, and the Eastern Mediterranean Sea offers absolutely no comfort to the sailors deployed here. The dark ocean is not a sanctuary, nor is it a glorious theater designed for the display of blind human heroism. It is a cold, unforgiving buffer zone, measured strictly by mathematical constants, violent fluid dynamics, and absolute thermodynamic laws. Right now, the United States Navy is anchoring the most expensive, highly complex machine in the entire history of human warfare. We are looking at exactly 100,000 tons of forged, nuclear-powered steel resting heavily in this exact body of water. The mighty USS Gerald R. Ford, leading carrier Strike Group 12, sits on the dark water not merely as a ship. It operates as a sovereign, floating island of supreme American industrial capacity, projecting a massive hemisphere of absolute, terrifying lethality. However, projecting this immense power requires physical reach, and that critical reach is strictly dictated by the unforgiving rules of geometry. Look closely at the tactical map and study the raw, unyielding geometric coordinates that define this incredibly dangerous, high-stakes combat theater. The primary objective for this formidable strike group does not comfortably reside on a contested beachhead or a shallow coastal shelf. The designated target is nowhere near the shoreline, safely tucked away from the immediate destructive range of standard naval artillery fire. The true enemy is the highly integrated, deeply networked air defense system operated by the formidable Islamic Republic of Iran. Deeply buried S-300 PMU-2 and Bavar 373 missile batteries hide quietly within the jagged fault lines of the distant Zagros Mountains. These advanced surface-to-air systems are perfectly shielded from above by millions of tons of natural, impenetrable rock and dense earth. The physical distance from the flight deck of the CVN-78 to that interlocking wall of invisible radar energy is utterly staggering. The tactical computers calculate the exact journey to the hostile target zone to be a terrifying 1,240 nautical miles. Here is the ultimate, incredibly frustrating tactical paradox that aggressively confronts the strike group commander on this tense, critical morning. Look up at the expansive 4.5-acre flight deck of this marvelous, technologically advanced supercarrier. Despite the massive $13 billion price tag of the magnificent vessel beneath your feet, you will not find stealth fighters. There is no fifth-generation stealth fighter sitting on the catapult, waiting to silently penetrate the heavily guarded Iranian airspace today. The primary kinetic sword of this mighty carrier strike group is the dependable, battle-tested FA-18E and F Super Hornet. This aircraft is a legacy platform, an undeniably capable fourth-generation airframe, but it remains heavily bound by strict thermodynamic reality. The Super Hornet possesses a maximum loaded combat radius of roughly 500 nautical miles before its internal fuel tanks run dry. What exactly happens when the ultimate, billion-dollar symbol of American military power is seemingly paralyzed by the unyielding scale of geography? If the smart enemy knows the exact physical limits of your internal fuel tanks, how do you successfully break the tactical equation? How do you shatter an enemy face, sitting firmly outside your physical reach, when every available tactical weapon seemingly falls short? The obsolete, heavily physical combat doctrines of the 20th century will tell you to simply push forward and violently accept the resulting attrition. Old military logic demands that you blindly string together thousands of nautical miles of slow-flying gas stations to feed thirsty jets. You would force them to fly straight into the terrifying teeth of the enemy's surface-to-air missile rings, relying purely on electronic jamming. Today, modern naval tacticians absolutely reject that suicidal, outdated mathematical equation because blind courage simply does not magically generate necessary aerodynamic lift. Human bravery does not alter the lethal ballistic trajectory of a Mach 6 interceptor, nor does it magically create fuel in empty tanks. Before we brilliantly engineer the winning solution, we must carefully autopsy the harsh constraints making this urgent mission seemingly impossible to execute. The primary enemy in this dark theater is not just the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, but ruthless aviation mathematics and pure physical friction. We start our analysis with biological friction, acknowledging that while machines can be quickly refueled, a human operator cannot simply be rebooted. The USS Gerald R did not sail fresh out of its home port in Norfolk, Virginia with a fully rested crew. It was violently redirected from a high-pressure, intensely demanding deployment in the busy Southcom area of operations without a proper rest period. The 4,500 American sailors on board had been floating in a heavily armored steel box for over 200 days. Nuclear reactors operate flawlessly for 50 years, but the fragile human nervous system possesses a hard, completely uncompromising limit under severe stress. You cannot safely mandate razor-sharp focus when the human brain is practically bleeding from severe fatigue and entirely disrupted, chaotic circadian rhythms. Raw adrenaline can only chemically mask the dangerous degradation of critical fine motor skills for a painfully short, temporary window of time. And yet, critical time has suddenly run out, because the volatile geopolitical landscape has dramatically shifted, erasing the luxury of a delay. National Reconnaissance Office satellites positioned in low Earth orbit have just transmitted a terrifying Category 1 intelligence drop directly to the carrier. Deep inside the Zagros Mountains, hostile Iranian strategic forces are rapidly pumping highly volatile liquid propellant into a barrage of ballistic missiles. Liquid fueling is the final irreversible step before launch, and the terrifying countdown timer on the launch authority stands at precisely 4 hours. To overwhelm those mountain air defenses, the Ford must trigger its maximum surge rate of 270 combat sorties in 24 hours. A massive round-trip flights equating to a continuous operational time of nearly 6 hours per aircraft completely ruins the strict logistical turnaround schedule. You cannot mathematically achieve 270 daily sorties if your primary lethal assets are entirely missing from the deck for 6 hours. Dragging vulnerable Air Force stratotankers near the Iranian border to extend fighter reach merely creates a massive, floating target-rich environment today. If the slow tanker drops from the sky, the entire Allied strike package is immediately starved of fuel and crashes violently into the ocean. The clock is violently ticking down from exactly 4 hours, and to win, the United States Navy must fundamentally rewrite aerial warfare. When your physical arm is entirely too short to forcefully punch the distant enemy, you do not foolishly stretch it beyond breaking. You simply choose to cleanly detach it, forming the incredible mechanical core of the Naval Integrated Fire Control Counter-Air Combat Doctrine. To successfully survive in a highly contested, deadly anti-access area denial environment, the United States completely deletes the traditional fighter jet. The trusted F/A-18 E&F Super Hornet is brutally stripped of its glamorous, traditional dogfighting role, becoming ruthlessly, coldly industrial today. The magnificent twin-engine jet is permanently transformed into a heavy missile truck, and its sole vital purpose is pure payload haulage. The lethal cargo it confidently carries is pure stealth kinetic energy, perfectly designed to be safely released far outside dangerous engagement zones. We introduced the Extended Range Joint Air-to-Surface Standoff Missile, a brilliant, autonomous, low-observable cruise missile with devastating destructive power. Its incredibly effective range vastly exceeds 500 nautical miles, cleanly replacing fragile human vulnerability with radar-absorbing composite materials and logic. It ensures that the most dangerous, terrifying segment of the combat flight profile is boldly undertaken by a machine, not a human pilot. But cutting-edge intelligence and extended range clearly come with a severe, heavily penalizing weight penalty that affects standard carrier flight operations. The laws of aerodynamics relentlessly demand a massive amount of raw kinetic energy to safely achieve lift with such a heavy payload. How exactly do you launch a violently heavy, 66,000-pound max gross weight missile truck off a tiny, cramped runway? You certainly cannot safely rely on the violently inconsistent jolts of legacy steam catapults, which risk violently tearing the burdened airframe apart. The twin nuclear reactors pump a staggering 13,800 volts of clean electrical power directly into the massive ship grid. This boundless energy flawlessly feeds the brand new electromagnetic aircraft launch system, forcefully applying a tightly controlled, closed-loop, smooth acceleration profile. The brilliant linear induction motors violently discharge 121 megajoules of stored kinetic energy without causing dangerous mechanical airframe tearing. However, a successful electromagnetic launch merely solves the initial lift equation, and the complicated fuel solution requires perfectly safe, distant zone logistical operations. Instead of pushing highly vulnerable aerial assets into contested enemy airspace, massive Air Force stratotankers safely establish an orbital refueling track over water. The moment the Super Hornet is violently hurled off the carrier deck, it aggressively, powerfully climbs to exactly 30,000 thin feet. It successfully tops off its empty internal tanks to absolute full capacity before it ever technically leaves the protective sanctuary of the fleet. Now the heavy missile truck is fully loaded and fueled, but it desperately needs silent electronic eyes to locate the deeply buried targets. The incredibly sophisticated distributed kill web finally activates, mathematically mandating the absolute, unyielding separation of the forward tracking sensor and the distant shooter. By effectively severing the invisible data link between the heavily armed aircraft and the forward tracking sensor, unparalleled survivability is finally achieved. The lethal long-range gun fundamentally requires absolutely no biological eyes, and the hyper-advanced invisible eyes carry no heavy kinetic gun. The terrifying 4-hour strategic launch countdown is burning rapidly into the digital ether, demanding that theoretical architecture now transition into violent execution. The impending war certainly does not loudly start with a bright, terrifying explosion, nor does it violently begin with a massive wave. It terrifyingly, silently starts in an envelope of absolute electromagnetic silence, completely devoid of any detectable radar warnings or obvious thermal blooming. To perfectly provide the critical digital eyes for the distant fleet, a stealthy flight of Air Force F-35A Lightning IIs launches. They silently depart from highly secure Allied bases situated in the volatile Middle East, immediately penetrating the hostile airspace of the Zagros Mountains. They operate flawlessly under the protective cover of their cutting-edge, mathematically perfect radar-absorbent geometry and completely integrated, highly advanced avionics suite. Their internal weapons bays deliberately hold only the absolute bare minimum air-to-air interceptor missiles, carried strictly for absolute last resort self-preservation. They are absolutely not carrying heavy, non-stealthy strike ordnance that would ruin their radar cross-section, acting strictly as invisible digital vacuums. These incredibly sophisticated, fifth-generation flying supercomputers are brilliantly designed solely to silently inhale massive amounts of encrypted data from the hostile environment. To meticulously maintain their flawless stealth profile, the F-35As power down their incredibly powerful active tracking radars immediately upon entry. They deeply enter strict, unforgiving emission control status, flying completely, terrifyingly dark, and refusing to emit even a single watt of detectable electromagnetic energy. The incredibly dangerous airspace aggressively hovering over the jagged Zagros Mountains is certainly not empty, but heavily flooded with resonance early warning radars. As they masterfully thread the impossible needle through this invisible web of deadly radiation, the F-35A becomes a completely passive sensor. The highly advanced integrated Barracuda electronic warfare system silently absorbs every stray microwave emission leaking from the Iranian air defense grid below. It mathematically measures the precise signal strength, instantly calculates the exact time difference of arrival, and beautifully triangulates the geographic combat coordinates. It brilliantly maps the dormant Bavar and S-300 surface-to-air batteries without ever foolishly sending a single detectable radar ping. This incredibly critical telemetry is instantly encrypted and violently fired up into the satellite architecture, using a highly directional, multifunction advanced data link. The completely blind enemy is currently being mathematically mapped and violently sentenced to absolute, inescapable death, and they do absolutely not even mathematically know it. But merely mapping a highly defended static target does not actually destroy it, because raw data remains utterly useless without a lethal kinetic delivery. The massive, decentralized tactical cloud now urgently requires the immediate, violent arrival of the designated executioners to finally complete the lethal digital equation. With the incredibly accurate targeting matrix now densely populated in the secure digital cloud thousands of miles away, the heavy strike package launches. The formidable fleet of heavily burdened FA-18E and F Super Hornets successfully completes their critical aerial refueling sequence over the safe waters. They quickly establish a highly coordinated circular holding pattern at a predetermined, completely secure standoff coordinate, roughly 600 nautical miles away. This perfectly calculated location represents an absolute mathematical sanctuary, completely outside the maximum kinematic range of any hostile Iranian surface-to-air interceptor. To strictly prevent disastrous early detection, the highly trained Navy pilots manually flip their powerful active radars completely off before reaching the zone. Deep inside the cramped avionics bay, the tactical fire control computers completely passively receive the raw targeting telemetry actively downloaded from the cloud. The F-35As loitering silently over the treacherous mountains securely feed real-time, perfectly millimeter-accurate kill coordinates directly to the fleet. This precious targeting data is instantly injected into the advanced electronic brains of the heavy AGM-158B missiles slung securely under the wings. The deadly, unforgiving trigger is being electronically pulled from another time zone, entirely bypassing the absolute need for the launching aircraft to see. However, the exact moment of weapon release immediately triggers another highly critical, extremely time-sensitive logistical and mathematical equation for the aircraft. The aircraft must physically drop the massive weight and completely vanish from the hostile region before the carrier logistical cycle mathematically collapses. At the precise 600 nautical mile mark, the final authorization is cryptographically confirmed, and the irrevocable firing order is instantly given. With a loud, violent mechanical clunk, the heavy stealth cruise missiles abruptly drop from the thick pylons, heavily plunging toward the ocean. Their incredibly small, highly efficient turbofan engines instantly spool up to maximum power, violently arresting the rapid descent to confidently sustain horizontal flight. And in this exact, incredibly brief second, the brilliant logistical math of the Naval Integrated Fire Control Counter-Air Combat Doctrine perfectly reveals itself. The precise instant the weapons violently leave the aircraft, the highly disciplined pilots bank hard and expertly execute an immediate return to base. They absolutely do not foolishly push forward to visually confirm the kills, turning their tails entirely and flying straight back to the Mediterranean. Because the valuable aircraft only flew a tiny fraction of the full distance, the turnaround time for the tired flight deck drastically plummets. Deep in the massive hull of the Ford, the advanced, fully electromagnetic weapons elevators flawlessly operate with utterly perfect, entirely frictionless mechanical precision. They are rapidly moving up to 1.8 million heavy pounds of deadly explosive ordnance, absolutely seamlessly to the busy flight deck. To rapidly rearm the returning jets by completely decoupling the immense distance of the strike, the smart Navy has literally hacked the timeline. The raw, terrifying volume of massive incoming fire is strictly a calculated byproduct of brilliantly manipulating both physical time and vast operational space. It masterfully allows the giant carrier to easily achieve its 270 sortie surge rate without completely exhausting the tired biological crew. The expensive carrier logistics loop is heavily secured, but the deadly, completely autonomous stealth weapons are now completely alone in the dangerous sky. The perfectly executed, highly complex digital setup officially ends here, and the brutal, unforgiving kinetic reality of modern explosive warfare finally begins. Hundreds of AGM-158B JASSM-ERs drop to the deck, engaging in extreme, incredibly aggressive terrain-following flight profiles at high subsonic speeds. They masterfully use the jagged, towering Zagros rock formations to physically mask their tiny radar signatures from the ground-based Iranian missile interceptors. As the massive, silent swarm violently crosses the border, highly trained Iranian cyber commands finally detect the bizarre anomaly and activate their defenses. They aggressively turn on highly powered GPS spoofing arrays, and the fragile satellite links connecting the missiles to space are violently severed. The primary navigation channels are aggressively flooded with intense, overwhelming cryptographic noise that would absolutely destroy a significantly lesser, older generation strike weapon. A lesser weapon completely fails here, violently crashing into the harsh terrain. But the JASSM-ER simply switches its internal electronic sensory input. Its brilliant artificial intelligence instantly falls completely back to its incredibly reliable, completely unjammable internal inertial navigation system, without a single microsecond delay. It quickly activates its advanced imaging infrared seeker and seamlessly transitions to highly autonomous, completely independent target recognition and geometric mapping algorithms. It mathematically compares the real-time thermal heat signatures of the difficult terrain directly against its preloaded, incredibly dense, solid-state memory drives. It fiercely navigates the dark mountains by pure geometry and heat alone, quickly rendering the massive Iranian electronic jamming attempts completely mathematically irrelevant. Exactly 10 nautical miles from the designated target zone, the swarm violently hits the absolute physical limit of stealth technology against powerful radars. The massive, extremely powerful phased array radar dishes of an Iranian S-300 battery angrily blast through the dense mountain ground clutter. The hostile tracking algorithms firmly lock onto the incoming targets, and the highly automated, deadly Russian-built defense protocols immediately initiate their launch. Massive interceptor missiles violently clear their vertical launch tubes, aggressively accelerating to Mach 6 in mere seconds and tearing through the thin air. The highly intelligent JASSM-ER swarm instantly reacts to the incoming threat, violently scattering the formation to heavily complicate the lethal intercept geometry. But Mach 6 represents utterly unforgiving, highly lethal physics, and exactly 3 JASSM-ERs flying in the exposed vanguard are unfortunately instantly caught. They are completely obliterated by a terrifying hypervelocity shockwave of dense tungsten fragmentation, aggressively expanding outward at 8,000 feet per second. The advanced composite airframes are brutally shredded into violently burning debris, proving that the desperate enemy has finally drawn first blood tonight. However, the desperate Iranian defenders have absolutely fallen into a completely fatal, mathematically inescapable trap carefully designed by the brilliant American naval tacticians. An S-300 launch vehicle has a hard physical limit, holding exactly 4 ready-to-fire interceptors, and it burned them all. While the completely empty Iranian launchers mechanically struggle to painfully reload their large tubes, the dark sky is already filled with more weapons. The absolute engagement bandwidth of the defensive grid is completely overwhelmed, resulting in a massive, totally fatal buffer overflow of unstoppable kinetic energy. The trailing JASSM-ERs fiercely fly directly through the aggressively expanding clouds of hot shrapnel left behind by their totally destroyed robotic wingmen. There is absolutely no emotional hesitation in these machines, and there is no human morale to break when facing the intense anti-aircraft fire. They violently strike the massive radar dishes and the reinforced command bunkers with perfectly, precisely calculated kinetic overlapping, ensuring absolutely no structure survives. 1,000-pound deep penetrating warheads aggressively detonate deep inside the thick concrete structures, violently collapsing the entire subterranean network into complete dust. The once formidable, highly integrated Iranian air defense network is systematically dismantled, and the massive ballistic missile silos are completely laid bare now. Their protective, heavily layered umbrella is entirely erased, and the massive existential threat is totally neutralized with exactly 3 minutes to spare today. The final casualty report, carefully transmitted directly back to the anxious commanders of the United States Navy, officially and perfectly reads, absolute zero. Not a single brave American aviator was tragically lost tonight, because when the deadly fire finally rained down, there wasn't an aircraft there. There simply was not a single vulnerable American fighter jet anywhere within a massive 1,000 nautical mile radius of the violent blast zone. If you truly respect the ruthless engineering, the unyielding physics, and the cold mathematics driving modern warfare, smash that like button right now. Do not forget to subscribe to Navy Show for more incredibly detailed, highly tactical breakdowns of the most advanced military operations in history.